I was halfway through loading another split log into my cast iron wood stove when I heard the knock at my front door, sharp and insistent like whoever was on the other side had a warrant for my arrest. Through the frosted glass panel, I could make out two figures, one considerably shorter than the other, and I already had a sinking feeling about who one of them might be. I wiped the bark dust from my hands onto my jeans and opened the door to find Brenda Patterson, president of the Riverside Meadows HOA, standing beside a tired-looking man in a khaki uniform with a clipboard tucked under his arm. "Mr. Zimmerman," Brenda said, her voice dripping with the kind of false sweetness that makes your teeth hurt. "This is Officer Dawson from Code Enforcement. We need to discuss your illegal heating apparatus." I blinked at her, then at Officer Dawson, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on this cold February morning in Boise, Idaho. "My what?" "Your wood stove," she continued, gesturing past me into my living room where my perfectly legal, EPA-certified wood stove sat cheerfully crackling away. Section 14.7 of the HOA bylaws clearly states that all heating sources must be approved by the board, and you never submitted the proper paperwork. I had lived in this house for 3 years, bought it from the previous owner who had installed the wood stove a decade ago, and this was the first I was hearing about any such requirement. "Brenda, that stove was here when I moved in. It passed inspection during the home sale." "County inspection is not HOA approval," she said, her lips pressing into a thin line that made her look like she had been sucking on lemons all morning. "Officer Dawson, would you please examine the violation?" The code enforcement officer sighed, a deep, weary sound that suggested he had dealt with HOA complaints before and knew exactly what kind of rabbit hole he was being dragged into. "Madam, if I could just take a look, Mr. Zimmerman." I stepped aside and let him in, shooting Brenda a look that she returned with a triumphant little smile. She followed Officer Dawson inside, her sensible pumps clicking on my hardwood floor like a metronome counting down to some imagined victory. I closed the door against the cold and crossed my arms, watching as Dawson approached my wood stove with the careful attention of someone who actually knew what he was looking at. He crouched down, examined the manufacturer's plate on the side, pulled out his phone and took a photo, then stood up and made a few notes on his clipboard. The whole process took maybe 2 minutes, during which Brenda stood there radiating smug satisfaction like she had just caught me running a meth lab instead of heating my home in the most cost-effective way possible. "Well," she prompted when Dawson straightened up. "It's a 2012 Jodal F400 Castine," he said, reading from his notes. "EPA certified, properly installed with adequate clearances, vented correctly through what appears to be a recently cleaned chimney based on the lack of creosote buildup I can see from here." He turned to me. "Do you have the chimney swept regularly?" "Every fall before burning season," I confirmed. "Had it done in October. I can show you the receipt." Dawson nodded. "That won't be necessary. Mr. Zimmerman, your wood stove is completely compliant with all county, state, and federal regulations. There's no violation here." Brenda's face went through several interesting color changes, settling somewhere between pink and purple. "But the HOA bylaws—" "Madam," Dawson interrupted, and I could hear the patience in his voice starting to fray. "HOA bylaws cannot supersede building codes or safety regulations. If this stove was legally installed and is being properly maintained, which it clearly is, then there's nothing I can or should do about it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual violations to inspect today." He moved toward the door, but Brenda stepped in front of him, her eyes blazing with the kind of righteous indignation that only a HOA president who has just been contradicted can muster. "This is unacceptable. I demand you write a citation." "For what?" Dawson asked, his tone flat. For operating an unapproved heating source in a residential neighborhood. There's no such violation in the code book, madam. Now please, I need to get going. Brenda looked like she wanted to argue further, but something in Dawson's expression must have convinced her that she had pushed as far as she could. She turned to me instead. The board will be hearing about this, Owen. You haven't heard the last of this matter. Looking forward to it, I said, opening the door for both of them. Dawson headed straight for his truck, a white Ford F-250 with the county seal on the door, but he paused before climbing in. I watched from my doorway as Brenda stomped down my walkway, and then I saw Dawson's head turn, his attention caught by something in the direction of the neighborhood clubhouse. It was visible from my property, sitting at the end of our street about 4 houses down, a sprawling single-story building that the HOA had built 5 years ago for community events and board meetings. Dawson walked a few steps toward it, stopped, pulled out his phone and took several photos. Brenda had reached her Mercedes by this point and was fishing for her keys, but she froze when she noticed what he was doing. "Officer, is there a problem?" Dawson walked closer to the clubhouse, and I found myself following, curiosity getting the better of me. From this angle, I could see what had caught his attention. The building had clearly been expanded since its original construction. A large addition jutted out from the back, easily doubling the structure's footprint, with new siding that did not quite match the original and windows that were definitely a different style. "When was this addition built?" Dawson asked, his voice taking on a different quality, more official and pointed. Brenda's face had gone pale. "I don't see how that's relevant, madam. I'm looking at a major structural addition to a community building, and I'm not seeing any permit posting. When was this constructed?" "The HOA has every right to improve its own facilities," Brenda said, but her voice had lost its earlier confidence. Dawson was already walking the perimeter of the building, taking more photos. I followed at a distance, staying quiet but intensely interested. "That's not what I asked." "When was this built and where's your permit?" "Last summer," Brenda admitted. "June through August, but we didn't need a permit. It's HOA property." "Madam, you absolutely needed a permit." Dawson had circled back to the front and was examining what looked like an electrical meter. "This is a commercial structure addition of approximately 1,500 square feet, which requires permits for structural, electrical, and plumbing work. I'm also seeing what appears to be a commercial kitchen vent hood through that window, which means you need health department approval as well." I felt a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. The tables had turned so fast I was getting whiplash, and it was glorious. "Now wait just a minute," Brenda started, her voice climbing into that shrill register that probably had dogs howling 3 blocks away. "You came here to inspect his illegal stove, which isn't illegal," Dawson reminded her. "But this is a major problem. Who was your contractor?" Brenda pressed her lips together and said nothing. "You did have a contractor, right? This wasn't some DIY project." More silence. Dawson made several long notes on his clipboard, took a few more photos, and then walked back to his truck. He pulled out what looked like an official citation book and started writing. "I'm issuing a stop-use order on this facility, effective immediately pending a full structural inspection. No events, no meetings, no access until this is resolved. I'm also citing the HOA for unpermitted construction, and I'll be forwarding this to the building department for further investigation. Someone from the structural engineering division will be out within the week to assess whether this addition is even safe." "You cannot do this." Brenda's voice had gone from shrill to nearly hysterical. "We have events scheduled. The annual Valentine's social is this Saturday." Should have thought of that before you built without permits, Dawson said, not unkindly but firmly. He tore off several carbon copies and handed them to Brenda, who took them like they were on fire. You'll receive official notice in the mail within 3 business days. In the meantime, I'm posting notice on the door. He pulled out a bright orange sheet of paper from his truck and walked to the clubhouse entrance, taping it prominently where no one could miss it. I stood there in my driveway, cold air biting at my face, watching this whole scene unfold like Christmas had come 2 months late. Brenda looked at the citation papers in her hand, then at me, then back at the papers, and I could see her doing the mental math, trying to figure out how this had all gone so wrong. "This is your fault," she hissed at me. "My fault. I was home minding my own business when you showed up trying to cite me for illegal woodstove. Officer Dawson just did his job." Dawson had climbed back into his truck but rolled down the window. "Mr. Zimmerman, you're all set. Sorry for the intrusion. Madam, you'll want to contact a lawyer and a licensed contractor as soon as possible. The fines for unpermitted construction of this scale start at $5,000 and go up from there, not including the cost of bringing everything up to code or potential demolition if the structure isn't sound." He drove off, leaving Brenda standing in the street clutching her citations like they were her death warrant. I should have gone back inside. I should have let it go. But I had dealt with 3 years of Brenda's petty complaints about my lawn being a 1/4 inch too tall or my car being parked 3 inches over my driveway line, and I could not resist. "Guess the board will be hearing about this," I said, echoing her earlier words. The look she gave me could have melted steel. She got into her Mercedes and peeled out fast enough to leave rubber on the street, which was ironic because she had cited me just last month for aggressive driving when I had accelerated normally from a stop sign. I went back inside, added another log to my perfectly legal woodstove, and made myself a cup of coffee. My phone rang before I had taken my first sip. It was my neighbor Tom, who lived 2 houses down and had been quietly feuding with the HOA for years over their refusal to let him paint his shutters navy blue instead of the approved colonial black. "Owen, please tell me I just saw what I think I saw." "If you think you saw Brenda get slapped with a citation for the clubhouse while trying to cite me for my woodstove, then yes." Tom's laugh was loud enough that I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "This is the best day of my life. Do you know how much grief that woman has given me? This is karma. This is beautiful, poetic karma." "It gets better," I said, and filled him in on the stop-use order and the potential $5,000 fine. "I'm calling everyone," Tom said. "This is going to be the talk of the neighborhood for months." He was not wrong. By noon, my phone had blown up with texts and calls from neighbors, some congratulatory, some asking for details, a few from the pro-Brenda faction accusing me of somehow setting this up. That last group was small but vocal, mostly consisting of the 3 other board members and a handful of retirees who seemed to think the HOA could do no wrong. The next day, I found a notice in my mailbox informing me of an emergency HOA board meeting scheduled for Friday evening at 7 p.m. Location to be determined due to facility maintenance issues. I had to give them credit for the euphemism. The notice went on to state that the primary agenda item would be discussion of recent code enforcement actions and member conduct. I showed up at the meeting 10 minutes early. They had moved it to the community room at the nearby Riverside Public Library since the clubhouse was officially off limits. About 30 homeowners were there, way more than usually attended these things, which typically drew maybe 8 people on a good day. The room buzzed with conversation that died down when Brenda walked in, flanked by the other 3 board members. Richard Hayes, treasurer, a balding man in his 60s who always wore sweater vests. Deborah Kane, secretary, a thin woman with glasses that magnified her eyes to an unsettling degree. And Patricia Morgan, member-at-large, who was actually reasonable most of the time but tended to go along with whatever Brenda wanted. Brenda called the meeting to order, and I noticed she had a stack of papers in front of her that she kept glancing at like they contained nuclear launch codes. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice tight and controlled. "As you may have heard, there was an incident earlier this week involving code enforcement and our community clubhouse." "Incident," someone called out. "It was Tom." "You mean the illegal construction?" Brenda's jaw clenched. "The addition to our clubhouse was completed in good faith last summer to better serve the community. Due to an administrative oversight, the proper permits were not filed. We are working to rectify this situation." "Administrative oversight," I said, unable to help myself. "You built a 1,500 square foot addition without pulling any permits. That's not an oversight. That's illegal." Several people murmured in agreement. Brenda's eyes found mine, and if looks could kill, I would have been vaporized on the spot. "The purpose of this meeting," she continued, speaking over the growing noise, "is to discuss the actions of certain members who have brought unnecessary scrutiny to our community." "Let me stop you right there," I said, standing up. "You came to my house with a code enforcement officer trying to cite me for illegal woodstove, because you have some power trip fantasy about controlling every aspect of this neighborhood." The officer looked at my stove, confirmed it was legal, and then noticed your illegal construction on his way out. "I didn't report you. I didn't say anything. You did this to yourself." "You could have been discreet," Brenda shot back. "You could have asked Officer Dawson to focus on the matter at hand, instead of letting him wander around the property." "I'm sorry. Are you suggesting I should have interfered with a code enforcement officer doing his job? That's obstruction." "Would you like to add criminal charges to your growing list of problems?" Patricia cleared her throat. "Brenda, maybe we should focus on how to fix the clubhouse situation rather than assigning blame." "Thank you, Patricia," Brenda said, though she did not look thankful. "We have contacted a lawyer and a contractor. The contractor estimates it will cost approximately $18,000 to bring the addition up to code, including permit fees, inspection fees, and the necessary structural reinforcements." The room erupted. $18,000 was a substantial sum, and everyone knew what that meant: a special assessment. Every homeowner in Riverside Meadows would be hit with a fee to cover the HOA's screw-up. "Absolutely not," someone shouted. I turned and saw it was Margaret Chen, a retired teacher who lived on Oak Street. "I'm not paying for the board's illegal construction project. The clubhouse benefits everyone," Richard said, speaking up for the first time. His voice was reedy and defensive. "The addition was necessary to accommodate our growing community events." "What growing community events?" Tom countered. "Half the neighborhood doesn't even use the clubhouse, and even if we did, that doesn't excuse building without permits. You all know better, or you should have." "The previous contractor assured us permits weren't necessary for HOA property," Deborah said, her magnified eyes blinking rapidly behind her glasses. "Then your previous contractor was wrong," I said. "And if they told you that in writing, you should sue them. But that doesn't change the fact that you're responsible for fixing this." Brenda shuffled her papers. "We're exploring all options, including a special assessment of approximately $250 per household." The room exploded again. $250 might not sound like much, but for a community of 72 homes, it added up fast. And for residents on fixed incomes or tight budgets, It was a significant, unexpected expense. "I have a better idea," I said, raising my voice to be heard over the din. "The board members who approved this construction should pay for it personally. You made this decision without proper due diligence. You own the consequences." "That's not how HOAs work," Brenda said icily. "The association is responsible for common property, which means all members share the cost." "Actually," came a new voice from the back, "that might not be true in this case." Everyone turned. A woman I did not recognize had stood up holding a folder. She was maybe 40, with dark hair pulled back in a bun and the kind of confident bearing that suggested she knew exactly what she was talking about. "Who are you?" Brenda demanded. "Jennifer Ortiz. I live on Maple Street, and I'm also an attorney specializing in HOA law. I've been reviewing the Riverside Meadows bylaws and the Idaho Nonprofit Corporation Act, and I think there's a case to be made that the board members who approved unpermitted construction acted outside the scope of their authority. That could make them personally liable." Brenda had gone pale again. "That's ridiculous. The board has the authority to improve common property." "Within the bounds of the law," Jennifer said calmly. "Ordering illegal construction isn't a legitimate exercise of board authority. It's negligence, possibly gross negligence. Any homeowner could potentially sue the board members individually to recover the costs." "Can she do that?" Patricia whispered loudly to Richard, who shrugged helplessly. "Anyone can file a lawsuit," Jennifer continued. "Whether it would succeed would depend on discovery and the specific facts, but given that you apparently ignored your contractor's obligation to pull permits and never consulted with a lawyer before proceeding, I'd say the homeowners have a decent case." I was starting to really like Jennifer Ortiz. So were most of the people in the room, based on the approving nods and murmurs. Brenda's carefully constructed composure was cracking. "This meeting is getting off track. We'll table the discussion of funding until our next regular meeting and move on to other business." "What other business?" Tom asked. "That was your only agenda item." "Fine. Meeting adjourned." Brenda gathered her papers and stood up so fast she nearly knocked over her chair. The other board members scrambled to follow her out, leaving the rest of us sitting there in various states of satisfaction and confusion. Jennifer made her way over to me. "You're Owen Zimmerman, right? The Woodstove guy." "That's me. Thanks for that intervention. That was perfect timing. I've been wanting to say something at these meetings for months, but nothing was ever quite egregious enough to warrant it. This is textbook board negligence." She handed me a business card. "If you or anyone else wants to discuss legal options, I'd be happy to consult. I think it's time this board faced some accountability." Over the next week, things moved fast. The county building department sent out 2 inspectors who spent an entire day examining the clubhouse addition. Their report, which somehow got leaked to the entire neighborhood, was damning. The addition had been built without proper foundation work. The electrical wiring did not meet current code, the plumbing was incorrectly vented, and the structural supports were inadequate for the roof load. The estimated cost to fix everything had jumped from $18,000 to nearly $30,000. The alternative was to demolish the addition entirely, which would cost about $8,000. A petition started circulating, organized by Jennifer, and signed by 43 homeowners, demanding the board's resignation and calling for a special election. Idaho law required a majority of homeowners to force such an election, and with 72 homes in Riverside Meadows, they needed 37 signatures. They had surpassed that in 3 days. Brenda tried to fight it, sending out a newsletter claiming the petition was invalid and that the disgruntled homeowners were trying to destroy the community over a simple mistake. That newsletter was a miscalculation of epic proportions. People who had been on the fence were pushed over by her dismissive tone and refusal to take responsibility. By the end of the second week, 61 homeowners had signed the petition. The special election was scheduled for March 15th, a month away. In the meantime, the board was essentially neutered. They could not make any major decisions without risking further legal action, and the clubhouse sat empty, the orange stop-use notice still taped to its door like a scarlet letter. I stayed out of most of the drama after that initial meeting, content to watch from the sidelines while my neighbors organized. But Brenda was not done with me. She filed a complaint with the HOA's management company claiming I had violated multiple bylaws, including the one about the woodstove, another about having firewood stacked too close to my house, and a third about creating a nuisance by encouraging other homeowners to rebel against the board. The management company, to their credit, reviewed her complaints and dismissed all of them. The woodstove was legal. My firewood was stacked well within the property line and not visible from the street, and there was no bylaw against talking to my neighbors. They sent Brenda a letter, which also got leaked, advising her to stop filing frivolous complaints or they would terminate their contract with the HOA. February turned into March, and the special election approached. 4 homeowners stepped up to run for the 4 board positions. Jennifer Ortiz, Tom Raines, Margaret Chen, and a retired engineer named David Kowalski, who had mostly kept his head down but was well respected in the community. They ran on a platform of transparency, fiscal responsibility, and following the actual law. Brenda and her allies tried to mount a defense campaign, putting up yard signs and sending out mailers, but it was a lost cause. On March 15th, I joined about 50 other homeowners at the library for the election. The vote was not even close. Jennifer, Tom, Margaret, and David swept into office with landslide margins. Brenda received 11 votes. Richard got 9. Deborah and Patricia fared slightly better with 14 and 16 respectively, but it was still a crushing defeat. The new board's first meeting was held the following week, and their first order of business was hiring an independent forensic accountant to review the HOA's finances. That decision would prove more consequential than anyone expected. The accountant's report arrived in April, and it was explosive. The clubhouse addition had not cost the $45,000 that Brenda claimed the HOA had spent. According to bank records and contractor invoices, the actual cost was $32,000. The discrepancy of $13,000 was unaccounted for, paid out to a company called Summit Property Services that supposedly handled project management, but had no website, no business license on file with the state, and an address that turned out to be a mailbox at a UPS store. More digging revealed that Summit Property Services had been registered by Richard Hayes, the former treasurer. He had been writing checks to his own shell company and pocketing the difference between the actual costs and the inflated amounts he reported to the board. That was when things stopped being an HOA drama and became a criminal matter. Jennifer, in her capacity as the new board president, contacted the Boys Police Department's fraud division. Detective Sarah Williamson was assigned to the case, and she did not mess around. Within 2 weeks, she had subpoenaed bank records, interviewed the contractors who had worked on the clubhouse, and traced the money from Summit Property Services to Richard's personal accounts. Richard was arrested on May 3rd on charges of grand theft and fraud. The arrest happened at his house at 6 in the morning, and half the neighborhood heard about it by noon. Brenda, who had claimed ignorance of Richard's scheme, was not charged criminally, but faced potential civil liability for failing in her oversight duties as president. The HOA's insurance policy covered some of the stolen money, but not all of it. The board decided to sue Richard personally to recover the rest, and they also moved forward with demolishing the clubhouse addition rather than trying to bring it up to code. The $8,000 demolition cost was covered by the insurance payout, and the remaining insurance money went toward repairing the damage to the clubhouse's original structure where the addition had been attached. I watched the demolition from my driveway on a warm day in late May, drinking a beer and feeling a sense of cosmic justice. The crew took 3 days to tear down the addition, haul away the debris, and restore the original building's exterior. When they were done, the clubhouse looked almost exactly like it had 5 years ago, before Brenda's board had decided they needed to expand it. Richard's trial was scheduled for September, but his lawyer negotiated a plea deal in July. He pleaded guilty to 1 count of grand theft and agreed to pay full restitution plus penalties, coming to about $18,000 after the insurance recovery was factored in. He got 3 years probation and 500 hours of community service. Brenda testified at his sentencing hearing, trying to distance herself from his actions, but the judge was not sympathetic. She was not charged, but her reputation in the neighborhood was destroyed beyond repair. She put her house on the market in August and moved out in October. I did not see her leave, but Tom did, and he texted me a photo of the moving truck parked in her driveway. "Good riddance," he wrote, and I could not have agreed more. The new board turned out to be everything the old one was not. They were transparent, holding open meetings where homeowners could actually voice concerns without being talked down to. They were responsible, getting multiple bids for any work that needed to be done and actually pulling the proper permits. And they were reasonable, focusing on actual community needs instead of petty power plays. One of their first acts was to formally review all the HOA bylaws and eliminate the ones that were either unenforceable or just ridiculous. The requirement that all heating sources be approved by the board. Gone. The restriction on shutter colors. Gone. The rule that you could only park in your driveway for a maximum of 23 hours per day, which had never made any sense to anyone. Very gone. They also established a formal process for homeowners to request variances or modifications, with clear criteria and timelines. It was not perfect, but it was a massive improvement over the previous regime where Brenda had essentially ruled by fiat. Life in Riverside Meadows settled into a new normal. The clubhouse reopened in September after passing all its inspections, and the new board started hosting monthly community events that people actually wanted to attend. There was a back-to-school ice cream social in August, a Halloween party in October, and a Thanksgiving potluck in November that drew nearly 40 families. I kept heating my house with my wood stove, which had become something of a neighborhood symbol. On cold winter evenings, people would joke about it being the stove that brought down an empire. It was not quite that dramatic, but it made for a good story. Tom did eventually get his navy blue shutters, which looked great and proved that the HOA's obsession with colonial black had been as pointless as everyone thought. Margaret Chen planted a vegetable garden in her front yard, something the old board would have had a fit about, and it became a neighborhood attraction with people stopping by to admire her tomatoes and zucchini. The criminal case against Richard wrapped up with his probation starting in September. I saw him once after that in the grocery store, and he could not look me in the eye. I did not say anything to him. There was nothing to say. He had stolen from his neighbors and gotten caught, and now he was paying the price. That was justice enough for me. Jennifer turned out to be an excellent board president, organized and fair-minded. She established office hours where homeowners could drop by and talk to board members directly, something that had never happened under Brenda's reign. She also started a quarterly newsletter with actual useful information about community events, maintenance schedules, and financial reports, instead of Brenda's screeds about compliance and violations. The HOA's finances stabilized. Without Richard siphoning off money, and without the need for expensive legal defenses or settlements, the association actually started building up its reserve fund. By December, they had enough saved to repave some of the community streets that had been deteriorating for years, and they contracted with a landscape company to improve the common areas with native plants that required less water and maintenance. On a cold evening in late December, almost a year after Brenda had knocked on my door with her doomed code enforcement complaint, I was loading my wood stove when my phone rang. It was Jennifer. "Owen, wanted to give you a heads up. We're doing a community awards thing at the New Year's party, and we're giving you the Good Neighbor Award." "For what?" "I barely do anything." "For standing up to Brenda and inadvertently exposing the Clubhouse disaster, which led to exposing Richard's embezzlement, which led to us getting a functional board. You're basically the hero of this story," I laughed. "I was just trying to heat my house." "Well, your wood stove saved this HOA. That deserves recognition." The New Year's party was held at the newly renovated Clubhouse on December 31st. About 60 people showed up, way more than had attended any HOA event in years. There was food, music, and at midnight, Jennifer presented me with a plaque that read, "To Owen Zimmerman for heating his home and warming our community. Good Neighbor Award 2026. It was cheesy as hell and I loved it." I gave a short speech thanking everyone for their support over the past year, and acknowledging that sometimes standing up for yourself means standing up for everyone. Tom shouted something about navy blue shutters that got a big laugh, and then we all counted down to midnight and toasted the new year. As I drove home that night, my ridiculous plaque sitting on the passenger seat, I thought about how strange the past year had been. I had never wanted to be the center of an HOA drama. I had never aspired to be the guy who brought down a corrupt board president and exposed an embezzling treasurer. I had just wanted to burn wood in my legal wood stove and be left alone. But sometimes life does not let you stay on the sidelines. Sometimes a petty tyrant with a clipboard shows up at your door, and you have to decide whether to roll over or stand firm. I had stood firm, not because I was particularly brave or principled, but because I was tired of being pushed around over things that did not matter. The code enforcement officer who had started this whole chain of events, Officer Dawson, became something of an accidental hero in the neighborhood. He had just been doing his job, checking out a complaint, and then citing an actual violation when he saw one. But his actions had exposed rot that had been festering in the HOA for years. I heard through the grapevine that he had been promoted to senior code enforcement officer in the fall, partially because his handling of the Riverside Meadows situation had been used as a training example for other officers. I never saw Brenda again after she moved out. I heard rumors that she had bought a condo in Meridian, a nearby city, and that she had tried to get elected to that HOA's board, but had been rejected once the residents looked up her history. The internet makes it hard to escape your past, especially when your past includes presiding over illegal construction and financial fraud. Richard served his probation quietly, and I heard he had taken a job as a bookkeeper at a car dealership, though I imagined his embezzlement conviction made it hard to find work in financial positions. He had sold his house in Riverside Meadows to pay the restitution, and the new owners were a young couple with a baby who became active in the community almost immediately. Deborah and Patricia, the other two former board members, stayed in the neighborhood but kept low profiles. Patricia actually apologized to me at the grocery store one day, saying she should have questioned Brenda more and pushed back on some of the more aggressive enforcement actions. I appreciated the apology. She had not been malicious, just conflict-averse, and sometimes that is its own kind of problem. The clubhouse, now back to its original size and fully legal, became a genuine community asset. The new board made sure it was available for residents to reserve for private events, and families started using it for birthday parties, graduation celebrations, and other gatherings. It turned out that, when you treat people with respect and operate within the law, they actually want to participate in community life. My wood stove kept burning through that winter and the next, a reliable source of heat, and a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of resistance can have the biggest consequences. I never did fill out that ridiculous HOA approval form for it, and the new board made it clear they had no intention of requiring one. Some battles, once won, stay won. Tom became the HOA treasurer, taking over the position that Richard had corrupted. He ran the finances with an obsessive attention to detail born from years of watching the previous board mismanage money. Every month, he published a detailed financial report showing exactly where every dollar went, and homeowners could log into an online portal to see real-time budget information. It was the kind of transparency that should have existed all along. Margaret took over as secretary, and her meeting minutes were models of clarity and completeness. No more vague summaries or glossed-over decisions. Every vote was recorded, every discussion was documented, and every homeowner had access to the full record. David, the retired engineer, became the unofficial facilities manager, overseeing maintenance and improvements to common areas. He approached it with the same methodical precision he had brought to his career, creating schedules, getting multiple bids, and ensuring work was done properly and legally. Together, they transformed Riverside Meadows from a neighborhood run like a fiefdom into an actual community. It was not perfect, no HOA ever is, but it was functional, fair, and focused on serving the homeowners rather than controlling them. As winter turned to spring, and then summer, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. I tended my yard, grilled on my deck, and enjoyed my house without worrying that some petty complaint would land me in front of a hostile board. The anxiety that had been a constant low hum during Brenda's tenure faded away, replaced by the kind of casual relationship with my HOA that it should have been all along. They maintained common areas, I paid my dues, and we all got along. The story of the wood stove and the illegal clubhouse became neighborhood legend, the kind of tale people told new residents as a cautionary example of what happens when HOAs go rogue, and a triumphant example of how communities can fix themselves. I was occasionally recognized at local hardware stores or coffee shops by people who had heard the story and wanted to shake my hand or buy me a drink. It was surreal and a little embarrassing, but also gratifying. Change is hard, especially in established institutions like HOAs, where power structures calcify over time. The fact that Riverside Meadows had managed to peacefully revolutionize itself through legal processes, rather than descending into endless litigation or bitter feuds, was something to be proud of. On a warm evening in June, almost 18 months after Officer Dawson had knocked on my door, I sat on my back deck with a beer, watching the sun set over the boys' foothills. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom, Board meeting tonight. All routine stuff. Nobody screamed. Nobody got cited. I think we're actually boring now. I smiled and typed back. Boring is good. Boring means functional. Enjoy it. And that was the truth. After a year and a half of drama, investigations, arrests, and upheaval, boring was exactly what Riverside Meadows needed. Boring meant the HOA was doing its job without overstepping. Boring meant homeowners could live their lives without fear of arbitrary enforcement. Boring meant the community was healthy. My woodstove sat cold and empty in my living room, waiting for fall when I would clean the chimney, stock up on firewood, and start another burning season. It had become more than just a heating source. It was a symbol of resistance, of standing up for what was right, and of the unexpected consequences that can flow from one person refusing to be bullied. I had never set out to be an HOA reformer. I had never wanted to be the guy whose complaint led to criminal investigations and board overthrows. But sometimes you do not choose your role in the story. Sometimes the story chooses you, and all you can do is stand your ground and see what happens. What happened was justice. Imperfect, messy, human justice, but justice nonetheless. The people who had abused their power faced consequences. The people who had been victimized got relief. And the community that had been fractured by poor leadership came together and fixed itself. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, I raised my beer in a silent toast to Officer Dawson, wherever he was. He had probably forgotten all about that February morning when he came to inspect a woodstove and ended up exposing an illegal construction project. For him, it was just another day on the job, another complaint investigated, another citation issued. But for me, for Tom, for Jennifer and Margaret and David and everyone else in Riverside Meadows, it was the day everything changed. It was the day we stopped being subjects of a petty dictatorship and started being members of an actual community. And it all started because I wanted to heat my house with wood, Brenda wanted to flex her authority, and Officer Dawson wanted to do his job properly. Sometimes that is all it takes. A spark, some dry tinder, and the right conditions. Before you know it, you have got a fire burning, and not even the most determined HOA president can put it out. The woodstove that started it all still sits in my living room, a cast iron monument to the power of standing your ground. Every time I load another log and watch the flames catch, I remember that cold February morning and smile. Brenda tried to cite me for it, and instead she lost everything. Richard tried to profit from the chaos, and instead he got a criminal record. Meanwhile, I still have my house, my woodstove, my community, and a ridiculous plaque that says I am a good neighbor. Some days, that is all the victory you need. The HOA is boring now, functional and forgettable, which is exactly what an HOA should be. And when winter comes and the temperature drops and I am sitting by my fire with a book and a drink, I will remember the year that my legal woodstove brought down an illegal empire. It was never about the woodstove, of course. It was about respect, accountability, and the rule of law. It was about refusing to let bullies win just because they have titles and clipboards. It was about a community finding its voice and demanding better. But it started with a woodstove. My perfectly legal, EPA certified, properly installed, regularly maintained woodstove. And I would not have it any other way.